Speaker, in my speech, I'm going to prove to you two things. Number one, I'm going to prove to you that there is no justifiable defense of a collection of surplus capital, and that any shift towards a political and capital system that decreases our capacity to accrue surplus at the expense of others is one worth pursuing. Second, I'm going to prove to you why the existence and preeminence of alt-right parties today means that we have a market and a body of people that are more willing to buy into some form of anti-establishment politics than has ever existed before, allowing for the creation of a Marxist party that has more power than it ever has and dilutes the influence of these alt-right parties. So let's get into why that's true. First, they have to explain to you fundamentally why it is legitimate for individuals to own property, but more importantly, why it is legitimate for individuals to own surplus. The capital marketplace is irredeemably ableist and irrecoverably racist and sexist. The Democratic Party does not stand for any of the people that are fucked over by the capitalist marketplace. The Democratic Party doesn't stand for the miners that voted for Trump. The Democratic Party doesn't stand for the mass redistribution of the surplus accrued at the direct expense of people with less able bodies, for example. And any mitigatory argumentation, which legitimately is the only thing you heard from opposition, cannot win them this debate because we have still produced a net good counterfactual. We create a center of moderation that is better. Number one, we create a center of moderation that is more for redistributing surplus to those in need, resisting colonial and post-colonial imperialist interventions, and providing an outlet for anti-establishment political identity that only exists through a form of populist politics in the status quo. Someone on an op bench has to prove to you that a self-made millionaire is any more deserving of those goods and resources than a person who was born without legs and was never able to access the same surplus. If they cannot do that, then they admit that a world where we better redistribute surplus, that a world in which we better redistribute surplus is one worth pursuing. Someone on op has to prove to you why Whitey Dude CEO has more right to surplus than someone who's denied an entry-level job for wearing a cultural hairstyle. If they can't do this, then they admit that a world where there is a greater push for intersectional representations of capital critiques is one worth pursuing. Warish already told you how we get these things. We shift our arbitrary perception of moderation, which is based solely on the way that we compare political parties to one another. We can prove this works to the extent that a socially moderate opinion is different in Amsterdam than it is in the United States. That understanding informs our nexus for compromise. Compromises on things like the tax code, on the extent of social welfare, on the extent of colonial and post-colonial intervention. When the nexus of compromise shifts, so too does our policy, to the extent that we understand policymaking as a process of debate with competing claims and compromises. Moreover, we think that this allows that more voters vote in their interest when this happens. So if I can prove to you that all of these principles are valuable, but they are fundamentally inaccessible to the poorest populations right now, in that Marxism and anti-capitalism are shrouded in academia, that Marxist politicians can't allow to continue to happen, that I can prove to you that people are better able to self-advocate, that they know the policies that will help them the most, that they're better able to vote against the Democratic Party, fucking them over continuously along with the Republican Party. Number one, they tell you that this is not unique, and they give you the example of Bernie Sanders. The Democratic Party institutionally and specifically excluded Bernie Sanders, made it so that he was unable to win the primary. If you think that's not the only reason, I don't give a fuck. There's proof that they did it. The Democratic Party doesn't want these opinions. Bernie Sanders is an exception, and he's an exception that I want to uphold, and he's an exception that I want to be more prominent. They tell you that it doesn't matter that the feminist movement exists. You can't win a uniqueness argument without proving mutual exclusivity. Feminism can be good, so can Marxism. Let's have both so that people can self-advocate better. Then they tell you the backlash argument. No. The rise of alt-right parties hasn't caused a fucking wave of crime against white coal miners, right? Instead, it has incentivized them to self-advocate. We just think that the advocacy they're doing right now is actually against their best interest. We would prefer that this was done by people who were taught to self-advocate by the Marxist Party. Then they tell you that the right wing already they tell you that the right wing's going to characterize the left. Yeah, that sounds really fucking unique. If you're going to get up here and spend your entire speech telling me that we don't do anything unique, then explain to me how the right wing gets any more incentivized to caricaturize the leftists on their side of the house. But moreover, I can prove solvency even further, to the extent that the rise of right-wing populist politicians in France, in the United States, in Netherlands, in Germany, all around the world is frightening but central to this debate because they both draw from the same body of voters. But before that, opening?
Yeah, so if the DNC was responsible for Bernie Sanders not being able to win, how do you think a Marxist candidate is going to win and access any of the benefits you're discussing?
Because the Democratic Party would be less fucking powerful because there would be another party that was prominent, right? That's just the debate.
And moreover, I tell you that they draw from the same body of voters to the extent that we can prove through the success of alt-right parties that there is a rising body of people who are willing to vote based on general claims of anti-establishment that is characterized by members of the working class that are excluded by the institutions in general, that those are the same people who would buy into Marxist analysis because the Marxist parties are the ones who are upholding their identity and explaining to them why that's happening in a way that's fundamentally more digestible than my fucking Marx Engels reader, right? So then we tell you that the Democratic Party doesn't support them and neither does the Republican Party, so instead we see a rise of alt-right politicians. We think that they would always, or at least in the vast majority of cases, be more inclined to vote for somebody in the Marxist Party than Donald Trump, because Donald Trump just excludes fewer of the working class, or that Donald Trump excludes more of the working class that constitutes what could be this body. So we tell you that this body of voters gets even more powerful in a world where they're represented by the Marxist Party and not the alt-right and not the Tea Party, right? So we're telling you then, what this means is that if at the end of this debate, right, you believe that all of the principled stuff that we tell you about why this is good and they decided to say it was irrelevant because they fucking know we're right, if you believe that those things are good, if you believe that there is an active body of voters that never existed before that can make meaningful change in our society, then you believe that this is something that we absolutely have to regret. If you believe that it would be better if we were raising up the poor, not by telling them that immigrants were stealing their jobs, but by telling them that rich people were stealing their jobs, by creating a universal identity for the proletariat that doesn't exclude on the basis of nationality, if we can tell you that that's something worth pursuing, then we can tell you that we absolutely regret. No arguments about the current political divisions in the United States, no arguments about the current divisions between poor minority groups is going to win them this debate, because we're engaging in a counterfactual where they always had this narrative, where they always had the prominence of a universal proletariat identity, where they were always told that they, number one, had agency, number two, were being lied to about how they can exercise it, and finally we're telling you that a Marxist party that is more prominent can also teach people to self-advocate. So even if you think that the party isn't the only source of good, we're teaching people how to make their own lives better into the future, we always uphold.